Hi, everyone. So today we're going to be going over the flying the coop question. This is a Word Python display question, and it's also working with classes and inheritance. And on the exam, there's definitely going to be some kind of a question where you need to work with a defined class and answer a couple questions about some code. So make sure you're comfortable with these kinds of questions and know how inheritance works and all of the ins and outs. So before we even get started with looking at these lines of code, we want to make sure that we actually understand the class. So let's look at that here. So first we see we have a bird class. In the constructor, we initialize a call and a can fly variable. And then we have a fly method, and then we have a speak method. So now we look at the chicken class. So we know that chicken inherits from bird. So let's just make a note of that here. Chicken inherits from bird. And we know that when something inherits from a parent class, it inherits also all of the variables and the functions, but we can also override these functions. So we see in this one, we actually override the speak method. So when you call chicken.speak, it'll use this one and not this one. And then we also see here that penguin is another class that inherits from bird. And we see that the class variable for penguin, in this case, can fly is false. And we also have a custom speak method over here. And so when we call penguin.speak, this one will be called and not this one. Okay, and then we see that Andre is a chicken, and we passed in cluck, and Gunter is a penguin, and we passed in newt. All right, so now that we have that, let's look at our lines of code. So our first line of code is Andre.speak bird coo. So we know that Andre is a chicken. So we're going to be looking at this speak method over here. And then we see that speak takes in this other variable. So in that case, it's this object bird coo. So this is an example of something known in Python as create and call. And that's actually when this is a new object. So this is a new bird object. So we're actually, even though we didn't create this bird coo object outside of our function call, and we didn't assign it to a variable, we are still able to use it because we're initializing it as we're calling this function. So back to the code, we know that Andre is a chicken, so we're going to be looking here. So the first line of code is bird.speak self. So that means we're going to go back up here, and we're going to be looking at this bird.speak. So we know that when we initialized Andre as a chicken, we looked at this constructor where we set self.call equal to this call variable passed in, and then we set self.canFly as true. So we know that self.call is equal to cluck. I'll just write that here. So self.call is equal to cluck. And then same thing for Gunter. We know that self.call is equal to newt. So we know that when we call, like in this line, when we call bird.speak, we're going to be looking here. We're printing self.call, and since self.call is cluck, the first line of code that we print is cluck. So now we know that this line is complete. And now we're looking at this line. So now we're looking at other.speak, and this other object is this object that's over here. So that means we're going to be calling bird. We're look at this bird speak method. And for this new bird object, we know that self.call is equal to coo. So when we print self.call for this other object, we're going to be printing coo over here. All right. Now looking at this one, Andre.speak. So we remember that Andre is a chicken, so we have to look at this one. However, we see that other is a variable that needs to be passed in, but we don't see any variables here. So this has no variable passed in. So because no variable is passed in, that means it doesn't match the signature. So because it doesn't match the signature of the method, then we get an error and nothing, it doesn't work. All right, so now we're looking at Gunter.fly. So back here, we know that Gunter is a penguin. So we're going to look at the penguin class over here. However, we don't see a custom penguin fly method. But remember that penguin is inheriting from bird. So that means we can go back up into this bird class, and we're going to be looking at this fly method. So in this fly method, we're checking if self.canFly. So we know that even though the canFly attribute is set to false in penguin, we see that in the constructor, since both chicken and bird are calling the bird constructor, which is over here, we know that we set the canFly attribute to be true. So let's just make a note of that. So self.canFly is true for both of these objects. So the constructor will override any class attributes. So now that we know that canFly is true, when we're looking at this fly method, we know that if self.canFly is true, now we want to look at this. So we run this line of code, and we're going to be returning "don't stop me now." And remember that we need to include the quotation marks because we're returning a string and we're not printing this string. All right, I'm going to move. Okay. So now we're going to look at Andre.speak Gunter. So we know that Andre is a chicken. So we're going to be looking at this chicken method again over here. And then when we, first we want to call bird.speak self. So we're going to be looking here. So we know that Andre's self.call is cluck. So first we want to print out cluck. And then now we see that the next line that we want to look at is other.speak. So in this case, other is this Gunter, is Gunter. So Gunter is a penguin, which means when we do other.speak over here, we want to be looking at this chunk of code over here. So we know that we set this call variable to be ice to see you, and then now we want to print that out. So then over here, we're going to print out ice to see you. And then we've completed both lines of code, so we're done. All right, I'm going to get rid of this. So lastly, we have bird.speak Gunter, and we see that when we call bird.speak, we're going to go over here. And the reason why this works is we're passing in Gunter as our self variable. So whenever we have, in this case, bird is a class and Gunter is the object that we pass in. So the reason why this is still able to work is because Gunter becomes the self. So Gunter equals self. If we didn't pass in Gunter, this would error because we wouldn't have a self variable. But now we know that we pass in Gunter as our self variable. So then we know that we want to print out self.call. And because in our constructor over here, we set self.call is equal to newt. So we know that when we call this and we're just printing self.call, we're just going to print out newt. All right. Don't know why this is here. But yeah, so that is the flying the COOP question. I know it kind of took a long time to go through all the classes and all the code, but just make sure when you're doing these kind of questions to be methodical and go step by step. And I hope this video helped.